The story of Lady Jane Grey is one of the most tragic and brutal chapters in English history. A tale where ambition, betrayal, and politics collided to destroy the life of a teenage girl who never sought the crown but was forced into it by powerful hands. Born in 1537, Jane was the great-granddaughter of Henry VII, and through this tenuous link, she became a pawn in a game of dynastic chess, played by the most influential figures of Tudor England. From the moment she was thrust into the limelight as the 9 Days Queen, her fate was sealed. Though she could not have known how swiftly and savagely her life would unravel. Jane was only 16 when she was proclaimed queen, a decision orchestrated by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, who sought to secure his power by placing her on the throne instead of the rightful heir Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII. Jane, by all accounts, resisted the crown. She was highly intelligent, fluent in several languages, and deeply religious. But she was not ambitious for rule. Her acceptance of the crown was more an act of obedience than desire. Those who knew her well described her as gentle, bookish, and devout, a stark contrast to the ruthless political figures manipulating her destiny. Yet once she was crowned, she became the lightning rod for rebellion and loyalty in a nation already fractured by disputes over religion and legitimacy. The coup failed quickly. Mary Tudor, who would become Mary I, rallied the people to her side with astonishing speed. The English people, tired of factional struggles and weary of illegitimacy, flocked to her cause. Within days, Jane's support collapsed, and she was abandoned by those who had elevated her. She was arrested, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and charged with high treason. Her downfall was as sudden as her rise, and for Jane, the transition from queen to condemned prisoner was brutally swift. Still, in those final days of uncertainty, she held onto her faith, reading scripture and preparing for what she surely sensed was coming. At first, Mary showed some willingness to spare Jane's life. Jane was young. She had been forced into her role, and her execution was not strictly necessary to cement Mary's position. But politics proved more powerful than mercy. Wyatt's rebellion in 1554, a Protestant uprising against Mary's rule, and her proposed marriage to Philip of Spain, changed everything. Jane's father, Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, joined the rebellion, sealing his daughter's fate. Though Jane had played no part in the uprising, she was still seen as a dangerous figurehead, a symbol for those who opposed Mary, to eliminate any future threat. Mary's council decided Jane must die. The manner of her death has long been remembered for its cruelty. She was condemned not simply to die, but to die by fire. To be burned alive was considered one of the most degrading and agonizing forms of execution, often reserved for heretics. For Jane, the sentence was framed as treason, but in reality, it carried all the weight of a political purge. She was young, innocent of actual plotting, yet treated with the full severity of the law, as if her mere existence posed a danger to the monarchy. On the morning of her execution, February 12, 1554, Jane was led from her cell at the Tower of London to the place of execution. Eyewitness accounts describe her demeanor as calm, almost otherworldly in its composure. She carried herself not as a condemned criminal, but as someone prepared to meet her fate with dignity. Draped in a plain gown and a simple headdress, she was a far cry from the grandeur of queenship she had been forced into months earlier. She prayed, read from her Bible, and declared her faith before the gathered crowd. Those who watched were struck by her courage, noting that she displayed no outward fear, only a quiet resignation to her end. As the pyre was prepared, Jane's shroud was placed around her, but in the chaos of the flames, it caught fire prematurely. Witnesses recounted the horror as the cloth began to burn, forcing attendants to remove it hastily while the fire already licked at the woodpile beneath her. The executioners forced her upright among the flames, and the crowd watched in stunned silence as the young queen, only 16 years old, was engulfed. The flames consumed her body while she recited her prayers until her voice could no longer be heard. It was a death designed to erase her completely, body and memory alike. but instead, it immortalized her as a martyr of youth and politics. The ethics of Jane's execution have been debated for centuries. Many saw it, even at the time, as an unnecessary act of cruelty, more about sending a message than serving justice. She was guilty in name only, a victim of her family's ambition and her country's volatile politics. Yet Mary, determined to secure her reign and silence Protestant opposition, allowed no room for compromise. Jane's death became both a warning and a symbol, proving how far power could go in silencing dissent. For the people who witnessed it, Jane's composure in the face of such agony left an indelible mark. Chroniclers described her as a martyr, someone who went to her death with a calm faith that surpassed her years. Her story spread across England and beyond, inspiring sympathy and outrage alike. The image of a teenage girl burned alive for political convenience resonated deeply, turning her into a tragic figure whose legacy could not be extinguished by flames. In the years that followed, Lady Jane Grey became an enduring symbol of youthful innocence crushed by political intrigue. Poets and historians remembered her as a victim of power struggles she never sought to enter. In many ways, her death became a condemnation of the cruelty of her age, a reminder that kings and queens were not the only casualties of ambition, but often the unwilling pawns thrust into its path. Her story lived on precisely because of its brutality. The shock of seeing a child condemned to the most gruesome of deaths, centuries later. Historians continue to debate the exact details of her execution. Some accounts suggest she was beheaded, others emphasize the burning at the stake, but all agree on the savagery of her end. What is undeniable is the atmosphere of political fear and repression that demanded her death, and the extraordinary composure she displayed in her final moments. Jane Grey remains one of history's most haunting figures. Her short life and terrible death reminding us of the human cost of power struggles and the ease with which innocence can be sacrificed for political survival. Lady Jane Grey's story is more than a footnote in Tudor history. It is a testament to how power consumes not only those who wield it, but also those who are caught in its shadow. She never sought the crown, she never plotted rebellion, yet she died a death reserved for the vilest of criminals. Her courage in the face of such cruelty ensured that while her reign lasted only 9 days, her legacy would endure for centuries. The flames meant to destroy her instead preserved her memory, etching her forever into the dark annals of English history as the teenage queen, who faced the stake with unwavering dignity. But as swift as her rise had been, so too was her fall. Mary Tudor, the eldest daughter of Henry VIII and rightful heir by the will of her father, marched upon London with a gathering force of supporters. The people, weary of conspiracies and uncertain allegiances, turned to her, and Jane found herself abandoned by those who had placed her upon the throne. In less than 2 weeks, her reign dissolved into dust. The gates of the Tower of London, which had opened to her as queen, now closed upon her as prisoner. Inside those cold walls, Jane faced her accusers. The charge was treason, an unforgivable crime in Tudor England, where loyalty to the crown was not merely a duty, but a measure of life and death. Though many knew Jane had not sought the crown, her bloodline and her fleeting claim made her dangerous. To leave her alive was to leave a spark that could reignite rebellion. Her trial was swift. Surrounded by men who had already decided her fate, she stood with a composure rare for her years. She did not beg, nor did she plead. When the verdict was read guilty of treason, Jane accepted it with the quiet resignation of one who understood that her life was no longer her own. She was just 16. Yet, execution in Tudor England was not only punishment, it was performance. Deaths were staged to send a message, to burn fear into the hearts of those who watched. For Jane, the message was clear. No one, not even the innocent, could defy the rightful queen and live. On the morning of February 12, 1554, Jane was led to the place of execution. The air was cold, the crowd restless. Some whispered prayers for the girl. Others muttered curses against those who had thrust her into this doomed role. Jane walked with a calm dignity, her slight frame cloaked in simple garments. When she reached the stake, the reality of her fate unfolded in its cruelest form. Unlike a quick beheading, which was afforded to nobles of her rank, Jane was condemned to the flames. Bound to the wooden post, a shroud was thrown over her. But as the fire was lit, it caught the cloth and consumed it before the executioners had finished their task. The flames licked upwards, fierce and unforgiving, forcing Jane to stand upright in searing agony. Witnesses recalled her, lips moving in prayer even as the smoke engulfed her. The crowd, once murmuring, fell into a heavy silence. Some wept, others turned away, unable to bear the sight. In that moment, Jane was no longer just a pawn of politics, she was a martyr, a young girl destroyed by forces greater than herself. Her death sent a chilling message across England. Loyalty to Mary Tudor was absolute, and any who stood against her, no matter their innocence, would meet a merciless end. But it also sparked whispers of cruelty, of injustice, and of the brutality of power when wielded without mercy. Over time, Jane's story was reshaped not as that of a usurper, but of a tragic heroine. Chroniclers wrote of her courage, her dignity, and her youth. Artists painted her as a symbol of purity betrayed by politics. She became, in the centuries that followed, the very embodiment of wasted innocence, a queen who reigned for 9 short days and burned in the memory of history forever.